climate to navigate.
1,300 New York Times employees, workers say they're not going back to in-person work because the cost of living in New York is so high, and whatever raises you're giving us are not offsetting the inflation. Wow.
Crazy, right? And we're going to see a lot more of that. You're spot on. Wage inflation, nowhere near real inflation. So people are getting really hurt right now.
Did taking oil out of the strategic oil preserve do any good to abate gas prices?
If it did, it's very, very short term. Look, the entirety of our strategic oil reserves is about half the daily global consumption of oil. So no pun intended, it's literally a drop in the bucket. It may have had a short-term effect, certainly not going to do anything longer term. And guess what? Our strategic oil reserves are now at decades low level. They were there for natural disaster, for problems domestically, and we're depleting them to drop a few cents on gas prices. It's nonsense.
But Philip, our inflation is transitory. It's going to go away at some point.
Yeah, of course. 2 years of transitory inflation. I think by definition, it is no longer transitory. That's funny.
Are we in a recession?
Absolutely. Based on the definition of recessions for the last, decades and decades and decades, it's 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. We are there despite what the Biden administration wants to say. Absolutely.
What is the Fed going to do?
The Fed are in a really tough position. So they're meeting, I think, on the 21st, so within the next week. They're going to raise interest rates. They have to, probably about 0.75%. Now, it's a gesture in the right direction. They got to raise rates because they're trying to kill demand in order to get inflation under control. It's a gesture in the right direction. Will 0.75% raise get inflation under control? Absolutely not. Last time inflation was as high as it is today was in the early 80s. Paul Volcker was the Federal Reserve chairman. He had to put interest rates above the rate of inflation. The effective funds rate went to almost 20% at the high, and it was that got inflation under control. For a little bit of context, the effective funds rate's 2.3% today, while inflation's over 8%. So they've got, it may make a slight difference, but they've got a lot more work to do to get these problems under wraps.
30-year fix for a mortgage, I think, hit recently close to 6%.
For the first time in a long time, yeah, it hit 6%, absolutely right. So, but that's the idea, right? So the Fed are raising rates. The idea is buying a home becomes more expensive. Less people buy homes. Demand comes down, prices go down. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. They think, well, maybe the markets will hold and we'll get inflation under control. You have to sacrifice one to achieve the other. So, it's a case of pick your poison today.
All right, so Philip, talk to us about what Americans can do, especially those who are on fixed income. What can you do now with inflation? With I think it's year to year 8.1, 8.3.
8.3 was as of Tuesday. Yeah, it's bad. And actually, by the way, that 8.3 is a nonsense, right? They weight out a lot of food and energy. If we calculate inflation how we used to in the 80s, which was just more accurate, it's over 16% today in real terms. So,
Philip, I love how they say, well, if you take out, just look at core inflation, take out food and gas. So if you don't eat and don't go anywhere, it's only 8.3%.
Exactly right. So there's the solution. Everyone just don't eat or travel and you'll be fine.
At least you'll lose weight.
A lot, right? Too much, perhaps. Look, it's a very, very tough climate to navigate. We sort of touched upon why. There aren't that many options. Stocks, traditionally a very good hedge on inflation. Today they're not. They're going down in value, so it's adding to the problem. Bonds, traditionally a reprieve, right? If you were worried about the markets, you could sit in bonds, your money would tick over. Nonsensical today. A government treasury is paying about 2.8, 2.9%. Even the official inflation numbers over 8, so you just lose money. The key is understanding the nature of our problems and then finding assets that are conducive for the climate. And that's where precious metals come in, right? When stock markets crash, they tend to go up. They doubled after the 08 crash because safe haven demand in tough climates, it goes up. Same with inflation, right? Everyone knows what it means. It's when things become more expensive. The technical definition of inflation, though, is the rising cost of commodities and services over time. Well, gold and silver, being commodities, as inflation rises, they move proportionally and they preserve buying power. I always tell people, in biblical times, 1 ounce of gold bought 400 loaves of bread. Today it does the same thing. It's the best way to preserve buying power, and particularly in tough times. So everybody needs to think about hedging their exposure, making sure that there's a portion of their portfolio that can grow in tough climates and mitigate potential losses they see elsewhere. And that's what we do.
Last question is a political one. Assume the Republicans take control of one or both chambers of Congress, at least the House. How does that change the outlook on the economy, the outlook on things like gold and silver?
Look, I think it changes the time frame and the trajectory for recovery, but it doesn't undo the problem, right? We can't make our debt magically disappear, right? And that's one of the problems of raising inflation is we've got so much debt, raising interest rates, sorry. We've got so much debt, they can't raise rates too much, otherwise the debt will become expensive. So, look, we need a change in the midterms because we